Hi, it's me. Welcome to this review of the Limbus Company Season 5 Battle Pass, Oblivion. Whenever a new season comes out, there's always a question if the Battle Pass is worth purchasing, as it does cost real-world money in exchange for a lot more rewards. In particular, each new Battle Pass comes with 6 new ego, with 3 being free and 3 being paid only. So, in this video, I'm going to go over each new ego as well as the other rewards of the Battle Pass, so that you may make a more informed decision as to whether or not you would like to purchase it. There's a lot to talk about, so let's not waste any more time. So let's begin with Faust's Lasso, the first ego on the Season 7 Battle Pass, unlocked at level 30. And we gotta start with the status effect of the same name, actually. Lasso, the status effect, is pretty simple, having a max value of 3 and inflicting Rupture equal to the unit's speed, along with 1 bind every turn. It also reduces by 1 every turn. For teams that focus on speed, this is a pretty useful status effect, and Faust does have a unit that likes high speed in LCA Faust. The status is inflicted by both Lasso EGO, though in Faust's case, it's only inflicted by the Corrosion. Lasso is a 4-13 rolling / gluttony ego with 3 coins, but can become a 4-19 when the enemy has enough Rupture. It also gains an additional coin power if the sum of Faust and her target's speeds equals 6 or more, which becomes easier with repeated uses since the ego gives her 2 haste for free. This is a fairly cheap ego for how much damage it deals, and Rupture teams are really going to like the fact that it actually inflicts Rupture with both coins. They'll also like that it gains up to 2 attack weight with high enough gluttony resonance, allowing you to inflict Rupture count to 3 targets at once. In addition, the passive inflicts Rupture count to random enemies once per turn whenever Faust kills or staggers an enemy with a skill. While not strictly Rupture positive, this skill is a really nice addition to a Rupture team that's fairly easily fueled and deals really nice damage overall. The Corrosion is a 4-16 rolling / gluttony skill with 3 coins, which can roll 4-25 under the same conditions as the Awakening. However, since it inflicts Lasso, it's strangely anti-synergistic with itself, lowering enemy speed by 1, but expecting your combined speeds to be high. In addition, positive coin Corrosions tend to be a bit weaker, since they cost so much SP to overclock into. While the last coin can hit really hard and killing an enemy gives Faust Gluttony power up next turn, the real benefit to using this over the Awakening is that you get the 3 attack weight without any conditionals. And honestly, it hits rather hard and probably warrants the 10% less chance to hit heads. Plus, the team it desires fuels it really well, so the extra 4 resources isn't likely to hurt too badly. There's one very obvious choice to use with this ego in 7 Faust, who both perfectly fuels it when you factor in her guard, but is also naturally pretty speedy. That said, the majority of Fausts have both Lust and Envy, so any of the best IDs she has, save for Blade Lineage and Regret, will be decent users of this ego. Honglu's Lasso is a 4-12 rolling blunt gluttony skill that can become as big as a 4-24 if the enemy has enough Rupture and your combined speeds are enough. This skill immediately has higher overall damage, plus is 2 attack weight by default. However, it is much harder on your Rupture count than Faust is, and is always anti-synergistic with itself since the Awakening inflicts Lasso. You need to have decent gluttony resonance in order to inflict decent Rupture count, plus you want high speed in order to inflict bleed and Rupture between your targets, and you would preferably not want the targets to have Rupture, so the first 2 coins don't eat up their count prematurely. That said, it is a really good ego for flat damage if that's what you're after. The passive requires you to specifically defeat an enemy via Rupture or bleed damage, so while giving yourself haste and inflicting a random enemy with Lasso are both neat effects, they're not likely to trigger all that often. The Corrosion is a 5-14 rolling blunt gluttony skill with 3 coins that can become a 5-23 under the same conditionals. In fact, losing 1 coin means that the Corrosion is almost always just worse than the Awakening, even if you factor in the additional damage effects on the final coin. The only things the Corrosion does that the Awakening doesn't is inflict bleed count, not very much mind you, and be able to gain 1 attack weight with a gluttony resonance of 4 or higher. Either way, it's not very worth using in my opinion. Without a doubt, the best IDs Honglu has to pair with this ego are K-Corp and Fanghan Office, who both fuel it the best with their available synergies, and also both just happen to be Rupture IDs. The issue is that Honglu himself doesn't have a lot of gluttony generation otherwise, though both Ting Tang Gang Gang Leader and W-Corp Honglu's have at least 2 of the necessary syn affinities for the ego. Regardless, it will need to be supplemented with a good team setup. Both Lassos work the best in a Rupture team, unsurprisingly. IDs like Lantern Don Quixote, 7 Otis, and Red Sheet Sinclair all do a good job supporting their strengths while also providing Sin resources that they desperately need. Faust Lasso does a really solid job inflicting a lot of Rupture count, and a good amount of Gluttony generation allows Honglu's Lasso to be a good skill to capitalize on enemy Rupture for damage. The first and only real miss in terms of ego for this battle pass belongs to Sinclair's Hex Nail. It's a 9-21 rolling Pierce NV ego with only 1 attack weight and 2 coins. Its only conditional increases the attack weight by up to 2 depending on your NV resonance. The big draw to this ego seems to be that it inflicts Curse before immediately activating it to inflict same turn debuffs. It inflicts more Curse than more unique debuffs are on the target, other than Nails and Curse, and since the first coin can inflict bleed, it will almost always inflict at least 3 Curse. Honestly, the best application of this ego is probably the Bind infliction, or Nails increasing the enemy's bleed count. The passive is at least decent, increasing Sinclair's Clash power by 1 if he has a negative status effect, meaning any self-tremor ID he ever gets will guarantee to have 1 Clash power, plus giving him some protection if he gets a lot of negative effects. It's a nice passive, and since the ego is pretty cheap, you could probably afford to use it once for the effect during long fights. The Corrosion is a 25-13 rolling Pierce NV skill with 2 coins, and immediately becomes much better because its 3 attack weight isn't locked behind a conditional. It also always inflicts the max amount of Curse, with the biggest difference being that it inflicts Clash power down from NV resonance instead of the target's Curse for some reason, making it more difficult to inflict overall. It's just generally a much better skill than the Awakening, though the increased cost in both the SP and resource department may make it a bit more questionable to use. This ego's other big issue is that there isn't really a good Sinclair ID to use it yet. I love NV Resonance stuff, but none of his IDs are really known for NV spamming at this point in time. The IDs that feel the best are Sync and Red Sheet, but neither really need the effects that the ego provides at this time. Rodion's Hex Nail is an 8-24 rolling slash NV skill with 2 coins and, contrary to Sinclair's, is actually really valuable. Instead of inflicting a ton of debuffs, though it still inflicts a lot of Curse and Nails, it instead naturally has 3 attack weight and focuses on healing the party. It heals 2 allies by 15% of Rodion's max HP by default, though it can get up to 25% if those allies have enough negative status effects, making it effectively equivalent to Pursuance in that regard. The big difference is that Hex Nail also heals Rodion herself, in addition to healing another ally with high enough NV resonance. The only thing holding it back is that it's on Rodion, who, like Sinclair, completely lacks a good bleed or NV resonance ID. The passive doesn't really help this, though there is a good chance that Rodion will get an ID that synergizes with this ego really well at some point during this season. Inflicting defense level down and a small amount more bleed is less valuable than the aura effect that goes over the entire party. Twice per turn when an enemy deals HP damage to a sinner, that enemy is inflicted with 1 curse. This can help a lot with clashing or dealing more damage, and with the addition of enemies using unbreakable coins, it's going to become a lot better over time. The Corrosion is a 28-16 rolling slash NV skill with 2 coins. While it no longer heals herself, it does heal an additional ally by default, and can even heal a 4th with 4 NV resonance. In addition, every healed ally gains offense level up equal to the number of negative effects they have, with a max amount of 3. The amount healed can't be modified this time, but it's still a pretty good amount with the right ID. Oh, and the Corrosion also inflicts a lot more bleed count, which will make it very valuable, if a little expensive once Rodion inevitably gets a good bleed ID. Of all of Rodion's IDs, the ones who make the best use of this ID right now are Diechi and N-Corp of all things. Diechi Rodion has a lot of HP and is Rodion's best ID for generating NV resources thanks to it being a discard ID. And while N-Corp Rodion is a pretty bad ID overall, she does fuel every resource other than Envy, and is probably her best bleed ID for the time being, plus can take advantage of the fact that N-Corp teams like to inflict a ton of nails to enemies, and Hex Nail inflicts a decent amount of nails, something this ID couldn't previously do without it. Neither of the Hex Nails really need a competent team to be valuable in some way, especially for Rodion since healing is always a valuable trait for an ego. Once the respective sinners receive either a good bleed or envy ID, they will both pair very well with N-Corp Faust, who perfectly feels both of these ego. In fact, a full N-Corp team actually really likes these ego for their bleed and nails infliction, so bringing a bunch of N-Corp really does help these ego to shine. In the future, other bleed IDs such as Barber Otis, Pet God Heathcliff, and Red Eyes and Penitence Ryoshu will also be really good pairings for these two ego in a team. Yearning-Mircalla Meursault unlocks at Battle Pass level 90 and brings with it a new effect called Rose Wedge. Rose Wedge has a maximum potency of 10 and a maximum count of 4, and the potency increases by 1 each time the unit that has it takes 10 bleed damage. It's a useful tool for inflicting bleed as well, since the unit gains 2 additional bleed every time they are inflicted with bleed, plus 1 bleed count if they have 10 Rose Wedge potency, up to 5 times per turn total. When this effect expires, at turn end when the effect has either 1 count or 10 potency, the unit that has it uses the effect and takes lust damage equal to 10 times the Rose Wedge potency, up to a maximum of 100 lust damage. If this kills the unit, it also increases Blood Feast by the same amount of lust damage it dealt originally, and deals a maximum of 20 lust damage to all of the defeated unit's allies. This is a really strong effect for dealing mass amounts of lust damage to bosses, and great for inflicting high amounts of bleed in any scenario. Yearning-Mircalla is a 5-21 rolling Pierce Lust skill with 4 coins, 2 of which are unbreakable, and it can become a 5-29 skill if the enemy has enough bleed. While this may seem underwhelming for a VoV ego since it's only 1 attack weight, this skill is actually insanely potent for dealing single target damage. It will absolutely tear through enemy bleed count since each of its first, second, and fourth hits force a bleed damage activation on the enemy, with the 4th hit forcing a few, if you're lucky enough, but the last 2 coins being unbreakable means that you're guaranteed to inflict at least 2 Rose Wedge count, with another 2 if you won the clash. It being a VoV ego also means that the base SP cost is rather low, so rolling high with this skill should be pretty frequent. Killing an enemy with the final coin also causes all other enemies to take fixed damage based on how much excess damage you dealt to the main target, which is icing in reality, but it is fun to deal a bit more damage to your enemies. The passive makes it so that whenever Meursault takes or is involved in an enemy taking bleed damage, he also heals the same amount, up to 10 HP per turn, which is a decent increase to his survivability. In addition to that, he inflicts extra bleed to enemies who have Rose Wedge, which helps to potentially max out the effect for the maximum amount of lust damage when the effect expires. The Corrosion is a 6-22 rolling Pierce Lust skill with 4 coins, 2 of which being unbreakable, and can become a 6-34 if the enemy has enough bleed. This version of the skill costs 45 SP to overclock into, meaning the actual damage of the hits may not be excessively high, but it has the added benefit of automatically inflicting 4 Rose Wedge potency with the 3rd coin if the target didn't already have any. In addition, it gains an effect on use to consume 10% of Meursault's HP in order to deal half of that amount in damage to all other units. If Meursault is below 50% HP, it inflicts and activates 5 bleed to his allies instead of damaging them directly, and Meursault heals equal to the amount of bleed damage dealt through the effect, usually 25 HP. Oh, and the free bleed activations no longer require 4+ resonance to work. Aside from those 3 things, this is practically identical to the Awakening, with a higher ceiling but one that you're less likely to hit. Plus, it costs 17 ego resources, so under most circumstances, this won't be the best. There are 2 Meursault IDs that feel this ego the best, being W-Core Meursault and Rhino Meursault, neither of which have all the required sin affinities. That being said, Rhino Meursault is a very strong bleed ID that makes pretty decent use of this ego thanks to his high HP overall. Don Quixote's equivalent to Meursault's ego inflicts a new effect called Polydipsic Rose. This one is a lot simpler, causing the inflicted unit to take lust damage equal to 1% of their max HP on turn end, provided they have 10 or more bleed. The effect has a max of 5 and decreases by 1 every turn, plus most bosses have high HP, so getting its maximum of 30 lust damage should be pretty easy in the majority of fights. Don Quixote's Yearning-Mircalla is a 3-15 rolling Pierce Lust skill with 4 unbreakable coins, and it can become a 3-23 if the target has enough bleed. It also gains up to 5 clash power with enough Blood Feast consumed, something that Don Quixote cannot get at the time of recording. Yeah, so we have to look at this ego as though Don Quixote has a Blood Fiend ID, despite her not actually having one at the moment. Despite this making it effectively impossible to activate the Clash Power effect on this ego, this is still quite strong in fights with multiple targets. Even with your coin power being fixed at 1 if you lose the clash, guaranteed 7 attack weight and 4 coins worth of damage is insanely helpful in most fights. The final coin can only inflict polydipsic rows if you've won the clash, plus it requires highest levels of absolute resonance, though that's pretty easy to get in a proper bleed setup. Despite being unable to consume Blood Feast herself, the bonus damage on each hit actually goes by the total amount of Blood Feast consumed on all units, making this ego's damage incredibly high in teams with a lot of Blood Fiends even now. That being said, it's one of the most expensive ego that is currently available, costing a total of 12 Sin resources. The passive is also really nice, passively giving small amounts of SP to Don Quixote each time enemies take 10 or more bleed damage. While a small effect, it's a pretty decent one. The Corrosion is a 3 to 10 rolling Pierce Lust skill with only 2 coins, but can become a 3 to 14 if the target has 10 bleed and Don Quixote has 200 or more Blood Feast consumed. Good luck with that. It's still 7 weight, so it'll be pretty hefty of a hit under most circumstances, but it lacks 2 coins and the first coin doesn't even have a damage conditional, instead inflicting a large amount of bleed potency based on the amount of Blood Feast in play. While it can inflict more polydipsic rows and also heals Don Quixote with the last hit, plus it makes her immortal during the attack itself, so that 20 bleed she gains from it can never kill her, its expense really does disqualify it from being useful. Well, unless you... that is. Of all the IDs Don Quixote has, none of them generate more than 2 of the required Sin Affinity types for Yearning-Mircalla, except for LCB Sinner Don Quixote, that is. Funny how it just happens to be a bleed ID as well. Realistically though, you'll want a more reliable ID for fueling this ego. This can be found in Middle, Blade Lineage, T-Corp, and N-Corp, who all fuel at least 2 of the necessary Sin Affinities required. Both Yearning-Mircallas function at their absolute best in a bleed team, specifically one that takes advantage of Blood Feast. While that only means Barber Otis at the moment, the upcoming Priest of La Mancha Land Gregor will no doubt contribute to this a lot as well. Other bleed IDs that work particularly well with these 2 ego include Pequod Heathcliff and N-Corp Faust, thanks to their above-average bleed infliction. Hook Office Hong Lu is a really good inflictor of bleed, and also has good Sin Affinities to help fuel these ego. Ryoshu is also a good ally in both her Red Eyes and Penitence, and Kurakumo flavors. Kurakumo Ryoshu may not be as directly powerful, but she has 3 required Sin Affinities for Yearning-Mircalla Don Quixote, and having Ryoshu at all grants access to Contempt Awe, a very powerful addition to bleed teams that also indirectly helps you to fuel your more expensive ego types. While the ego is definitely most people's priority for purchasing the Battle Pass, and all 3 of the Paid Pass exclusive egos are very solid overall, there are quite a few other things that getting the Paid Battle Pass would give you. I'm excluding announcers and manager cards because they aren't something that would affect your gameplay in any way, though the paid announcer at Battle Pass level 80 is a really interesting one and might influence your decision a bit. Without a doubt, the most important common reward from the Battle Pass are nominable Ego Shard crates, and while the majority of them are in the free pass, remember that having the paid pass lets you grind for more at triple the speed once you've completed the first 120 Battle Pass levels. The paid Battle Pass instead gives much more XP than the free pass, as well as giving quite a lot more guaranteed thread. Specifically, the paid pass also gets access to a special ticket that immediately levels any singular ID to level 50, and there's only one of these that's obtainable in the entire pass. The paid pass also gives a lot more lunacy, and a guaranteed Deca extraction ticket for Season 5 to help get one of those elusive Season 5 3-star IDs. That being said, even if you get that ticket, I recommend against using it right now, since by the end of this week only 3 3-star IDs will be available. If you do intend to pull for a 3-star seasonal ID, wait until after Don Quixote gets her seasonal ID for the most variation in good things you could possibly get. And that's about all I have to say about the Season 5 Battle Pass for Limbus Company. I hope this video has given you a good idea as to whether or not you want to purchase the Battle Pass for yourself. If you like this video, be sure to like and subscribe for the overabundance of bleed ego in this Battle Pass. I hope you have a good rest of your day, and I hope to see you again soon.